if you're asking me to do the whole crystal ball thing, I'm going to have to, quietly demur at the outset, or at least state up front that, if you went by my prior predictions, Katie Couric is beating Brian Williams and Charlie Gibson. Nirvana was a second-tier sub-pop band that never sold a record. John Kerry's president. The Republicans control the Senate. Star Wars fizzled out around 1983. And, that's just for starters. And the Red Sox probably didn't win the World Series either. That said, I think further down the line, as I've written, Google might find a need to buy content companies. And that's just simple math, in that a lot of their revenue, not the majority, but a large chunk, comes from AdSense, which is a revenue split model. And they give away a lot of the revenue. At a certain point, when they've scaled up, and that will happen at some point, it will make sense for them to have, it'll just look a lot more attractive to have 100% of the ad revenue around something rather than, 80%, 70%, 85%, whatever the content splits are. Now, to be clear, Google buying content should not be read like, Google buys CBS or Google buys the New York Times, but it could mean Google buys the Weather Channel, or better yet, weatherunderground.com, which is a competing weather website, a lot of data, a lot of traffic, less expensive than the Weather Channel. It could mean they buy mapping services. It could mean they buy Yellow Pages. Content can be defined very broadly here. I think you will see eventually Google will try to make some kind of operating system for cable set-top boxes. They clearly have an interest in that space. They've already done deals with EchoStar to sort of get some of that data. They've done something else with Nielsen to do a little more with that data on top of it. As for Microsoft, I would think that Microsoft might finally start pulling back from media. They've finally hit, when I say media, I mean their own media offerings. Steve Ballmer is very intrigued with advertising, and they've made some very big acquisitions. They got a really smart guy, Brian McAdams of Aquantive, now doing a lot of stuff for them. I think they may try to go for what's now the Google model, which is that it makes more sense to wreathe their advertising software around other stuff rather than do their own content. They've had a lot of money to throw at content, and not much of it has really worked out all that well. I don't know if the Wall Street Journal is, the big media story of the year, except for hopeless newspaper romantics like myself. I've said all along that, it was an indicator of how strange a company Dow Jones was, that Rupert Murdoch buying it was really the best possible outcome. That if Dow Jones had stayed independent, they would have been faced with, being surrounded by giants all around, and more importantly, significant deterioration in the core property, which is, of course, the Wall Street Journal. If you play around with the public filings, it's clear that the Wall Street Journal, at best, I don't know the exact answer, but it's clear, it looks strongly like, at best, they've been a marginally profitable to break even to slightly less than proposition. You can't run a company, a media company in this environment with your main property being like that. So if Dow Jones had remained independent, you would have seen, probably layoffs at the end of this year, layoffs at the end of last year, and this kind of slow bleed of what remains really one of the great information assets in the world, one of the absolute best information products on the web and print. They now have an owner. There's a lot to be said about Rupert Murdoch, good and bad. There's a lot to be said about how he's handled, the ownership of certain media properties. But Rupert Murdoch is a guy who, for whatever reason, really likes newspapers, has no problem losing millions of dollars, in some cases tens of millions of dollars on newspapers every year, who wants to invest in the Wall Street Journal. He wants to staff up, he wants to do more stuff. He's going to probably do a more interesting, broader web strategy, make the journal online free, and he's going to put some money into it. This is a big deal. And I just, Rupert Murdoch, I've noticed, particularly when I get outside of these wiseacre Manhattan media circles, people still really hate him. I did some, commentary for NPR, some call-in shows. People really hate Rupert Murdoch. And, I guess you have to look at the whole of News Corp. News Corp owns the Fox Business Channel. It also owns the Times of London and the Australian, which is a pretty serious newspaper in Australia. It owns The Simpsons. Last year, one of its movies was Little Miss Sunshine. There's a range of stuff here. To assume that the Wall Street Journal gets tarted up, dumbed down, whatever, more importantly, or even more subtly, that Rupert starts meddling somehow. I guess I give Rupert Murdoch credit enough, for good or ill, to be smart enough that he'll be smart enough to understand that if he mucks about with this, he destroys the value of it, and he runs his investment into the ground. And if he does muck around with it, as I've said, that should be the first line of his obituary.